Breaking news. The FBI has just tracked down her phone to a remote desert location. Authorities confirm a weapon was discovered at the scene. Evidence that could change everything.
Before we begin, if you are watching this, I need you to stay with me until the very end. Because what I'm about to walk you through is not just a missing persons case. It is a story about a woman who lived 84 years of quiet, faithful, ordinary life and then disappeared in the dark, in her own home, in the space of 41 minutes. And the only witness was a small electronic device beating silently inside her chest. Her name is Nancy Guthrie, and she deserves more than a headline. Let's start at the end of her normal. The 31st of January 2026, Tucson, Arizona. It's a Friday night, and Nancy is doing exactly what she always does: dinner with family. Her daughter, Annie. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Chion. A warm house, familiar faces, probably the same conversation topics they've cycled through 100 times before. She is 84 years old. She has lived in this city for more than 5 decades. She knows every corner of it. She is part of it. At 9:50 p.m., Tommaso drives her home. She steps through her front door. The door closes behind her. That is the last confirmed moment anyone saw Nancy Guthrie alive. Now, I want you to sit with that image for a second. Not as a data point, as a human moment. A woman in her 80s, walking into her home alone, late at night, trusting completely that she is safe, that her routine will hold, that tomorrow will come the way it always has, quietly, predictably. Morning medication, coffee, maybe. A church service streamed from her living room because she no longer attends in person, but her faith didn't need a building to remain real. She had no reason to be afraid. And then 1:47 a.m. A camera mounted on her front door. A quiet, passive observer in a quiet Tucson neighborhood went dark. Not slowly, not from a power glitch, deliberately. Someone, standing in or near her home at that hour, disabled it. Cut the eye watching over her, and then they stayed. They didn't rush, they didn't panic, they moved through her home for 41 minutes. Think about what 41 minutes means in a situation like that. That is not a grab and run, that is a search, that is control. That is someone who had already mapped this house in their mind before they ever stepped inside. And then, at exactly 2:28 a.m., a second signal vanished. This one wasn't mounted on a wall, this one was inside her body. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker lost its connection to her phone. Her heart was still beating, the device was still running, but she was no longer within range of anything that could reach the outside world. She had been moved, taken. And whoever did it had done it without triggering a single alarm. The next morning, the silence started to speak. Nancy missed church. For most people, that would be nothing. A late sleep, a minor schedule change. But for Nancy, missing church wasn't something that just happened. It was a signal. Her family knew it immediately. Calls went unanswered, knocks went unheard. And when family finally entered that home, what they found was the specific, suffocating kind of wrong that cannot be explained away. Her phone was still on the counter. Her medication, the medication she could not miss, the medication that kept her heart in rhythm, sat untouched. Her personal belongings were exactly where they should be. Nothing was in chaos. Nothing was ransacked. But outside, on the edge of that quiet home, there were drops of blood. Within hours, this case changed its shape. This was not a missing person. This was a kidnapping, and not a frantic, impulsive one. A planned one. A cold, methodical, calculated one executed in the middle of the night, by someone who had done their homework. Here is what makes this case unlike most. The person who took Nancy Guthrie understood evidence. They wore gloves, no fingerprints. They wore a mask, no face on camera. They disabled the surveillance before entering. They took her phone so she couldn't call for help, couldn't be tracked, couldn't reach her daughter, couldn't reach anyone. They left almost nothing behind. Almost. Because here is the truth that criminals in 2026 are only beginning to fully understand, and many of them understand it too late. The world itself is a surveillance system now, not just cameras, not just phones. The entire electromagnetic environment around us is constantly recording. Cell towers logging every device they see. Wi-Fi routers scanning for signals, even from devices that never connect. Smart home devices listening, cars passing through intersections, background apps updating silently in every pocket, on every street. And that means this: even if the suspect never brought his own phone on the night of the abduction, investigators don't need that night. They only need before. Because crimes like this don't begin at 1:47 a.m. They begin weeks earlier, in the daylight. In the slow, patient accumulation of information, surveillance passes, parked cars that seemed to belong, a person who looked like a neighbor, a vehicle that circled the block twice, pattern building, route mapping. Watching Nancy come home from dinner on Friday nights, noting the exact time Tommaso drops her off, learning her rhythm so completely that when the moment came, they moved through it without hesitation. And every one of those prior visits, if they came with a phone in a pocket, left a mark. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed it publicly, and I want you to hear exactly what he said. Cell tower data is already flagging anomalies. Flagging, that word is doing a lot of work. In investigative language, flagging doesn't mean maybe, it means something doesn't belong. A device appeared in that neighborhood that had no business being there. A signal showed up in a pattern that breaks from everything else around it. And when a pattern breaks, investigators pull the thread. They are pulling it right now. This is exactly how investigators built the case against Brian Kohberger in the Idaho murders. Not from what his phone did during the crime, from what it did before, repeated visits, late-night movements. A device that kept appearing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The digital world doesn't forget. It just waits for someone to ask the right question. And then there's the Wi-Fi layer, something most people never think about. Every home on Nancy's street, every router within range, may have quietly logged something it was never asked to log. Because phones don't just connect to Wi-Fi networks, they search for them, constantly, broadcasting a small signal that says, "I'm here, is anyone home?" And a router, even one you've never connected to, can detect that probe, log it, timestamp it. If the suspect drove slowly down Nancy's street, even once their phone may have spoken to a dozen routers without them ever knowing, and those logs, if they exist, can be pulled. Cross-referenced, traced backward to a device, and from a device to a name. This is how modern investigations move. Not in one dramatic moment, in layers. Quiet layers, building on each other, until the weight of them becomes undeniable. Now I need to tell you about the most remarkable and most heartbreaking part of this entire case. After Nancy was taken, after the camera went dark, after her phone was left behind, after she disappeared into the desert night, there was still one system working. Still one voice trying to reach the world. Still one device that refused to go silent. Her pacemaker. Modern pacemakers are not passive machines. They don't just regulate a heartbeat, they communicate. Every few minutes they send a quiet signal, a digital check-in. I'm here. The heart is beating. Everything is functioning. Under normal circumstances, that signal travels to a paired phone, to a monitoring app, to a medical network that can alert a cardiologist if something changes. Nancy's pacemaker kept sending those signals, even after she was gone. Even as she was being moved through the dark, through the desert, towards somewhere that investigators would spend the next weeks desperately trying to identify. And in those early hours, investigators had something rare. Proof of life. Sheriff Nanos said it directly, and I want you to feel the weight of this. She's alive. That wasn't hope. That wasn't reassurance offered to comfort a grieving family. That was a statement based on data, based on a signal still transmitting from inside a woman's body, a tiny electronic pulse saying, "I'm still here. She is still here." But knowing someone is alive is not the same as knowing where they are. The signal a pacemaker emits was never designed to be tracked across a landscape. Under normal conditions, it reaches maybe 15 to 30 feet. It is Bluetooth low-energy, weak, short-range, designed for a bedroom nightstand, not a search grid. But investigators weren't ready to give up on it. What followed was something that genuinely belongs in a different era, except it was happening right now, over the desert, outside Tucson. Helicopters flew low and slow, in systematic grid patterns, over terrain that most people would never bother to look twice at. But these helicopters weren't looking. They were listening. Equipped with amplified receivers, directional antennas, what experts call signal sniffers, they were scanning through millions of overlapping wireless signals, filtering everything out, searching for one specific digital fingerprint, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker ID. Picture that image for a moment. A fleet of aircraft, flying in the dark, hunting for a heartbeat. The obstacles were enormous. Desert terrain, hills, power line interference, the movement of the aircraft itself creating noise and distortion. The signal they were chasing was barely a whisper, even under ideal conditions. But here's what made it even more haunting. The pacemaker wasn't just broadcasting, it was recording. These devices log everything: heart rate, rhythm variations, stress responses, the precise biological signature of fear. And what investigators believe they found in Nancy's pacemaker data was not the pattern of someone sleeping, not the pattern of someone resting quietly in a room somewhere. It was the pattern of someone afraid. Elevated heart activity, sustained stress responses. A rhythm that told a story no camera had captured, no witness had seen, but a device buried in her chest had recorded with cold, clinical precision. The story of a woman being transported, being moved, being held somewhere against her will, her body's own systems responding to what her voice could not communicate. That data changes the timeline. It suggests what happened didn't end in that house at 2:28 a.m. It continued, it went on. And it pointed, along with other early investigative threads, toward a direction that has never fully left this case. South, toward the border, towards Sonora, Mexico. From Tucson to the Mexican border is less than an hour. For someone with a plan already in place, already prepared, that crossing was not just possible, it was likely. And once that line is crossed, the investigation changes its shape entirely. Jurisdiction changes. Access changes. Time becomes the most dangerous variable of all. While investigators were following signals through the desert sky, something else was happening in the public space around this case. The noise started. Messages, ransom demands, claims, some arriving in private channels to the family, others sent inexplicably to media outlets. And the demands themselves told a story not about Nancy, but about the person sending them. Real ransom operations are controlled, private, specific, and they do not decrease over time. This one started at millions, then dropped to hundreds of thousands, then dropped again, to tens of thousands, to the price of half a Bitcoin, changing week by week as if someone was negotiating against themselves. And the contradictions. In one message, Nancy is dead. In the very next, I saw her alive in Sonora, Mexico, from the same person, on the same day. Those two things cannot both be true. Former investigators who reviewed these messages were clear. This does not look like someone in control of the situation. It looks like someone orbiting it. Someone who heard something, knows something partial, and is now trying to profit from fragments they don't fully understand. Or someone performing for attention, feeding off the visibility of a high-profile case. But here is the uncomfortable reality. You can't dismiss them entirely, because buried inside the noise, there are specific details, real geography, real distances. The word Sonora appearing again and again, across sources that shouldn't necessarily connect. And investigators have to treat every thread as potentially real until the moment it proves otherwise, because the cost of dismissing a real lead is one they are not willing to pay. Meanwhile, inside Nancy's home, investigators had found something that had nothing to do with messages or media cycles. Foreign DNA, not Nancy's, not her family's. Someone else was in that house. That should have been the breakthrough, a direct path to a name. But the DNA didn't match anyone in the national database. No prior arrests, no prior entry into the system. Which means one of two things. Either this person has never been caught before, or the sample is contaminated, layered with multiple contributors, the suspect's profile buried inside a mixture that forensic science is still working to untangle. Experts describe this process as trying to hear one specific voice inside a crowded, echoing room. The voice is there, but it takes time to isolate it. And once it is isolated, the tools available to investigators are extraordinary genealogy databases, family trees built backward from partial profiles, the same methodology that solved the Golden State Killer case after 40 years of silence. The science will get there, the question is whether it gets there in time. 60 days. More than 2 months. No arrest, no confirmed location, no verified proof of life. And somewhere out there in Tucson, in Sonora, somewhere along the thread of this investigation, someone knows what happened, not in theory, in detail. They know what was said inside that house. They know where Nancy was taken. They know whether she is alive. And they have said nothing. I want to ask you to think seriously about what kind of silence that is. Because silence like that doesn't just happen. It is maintained. Every single day, deliberately maintained. Against a $1 million reward. Against FBI involvement. Against the public weight of a case that has touched people across the country. That silence comes from one of 3 places. Fear. Someone who believes speaking up will cost them something they are not willing to lose. Their safety. Someone they love. Their own freedom. Loyalty. Someone who is protecting the person responsible. Someone close enough to them to choose protection over truth. Or involvement. Someone who isn't protecting anyone, they're protecting themselves. Each one points investigators in a different direction, and all three are being actively pursued. Sheriff Nanos said something recently that I keep coming back to. He said, "We are closer. Not we are hopeful, not we are working on it. Closer." And investigators do not use that word publicly unless something real has shifted behind the scenes, something in the cell tower analysis, something in the DNA processing, something in a frame of footage reviewed 100 times that finally gave up what it was hiding. This case is not cold. It has never been cold. It is a slow tightening a circle drawn around a person who may not yet understand how small that circle has become. I want to step back from the evidence for a moment, from the signals and the data and the forensic science, because we have been talking about Nancy Guthrie as a case, and she is not a case, she is a person. She is 84 years old, and she has lived in Tucson for more than half a century. She raised a family in this city. She built a life here, structured, faithful, ordinary, in the most beautiful sense of the word, family dinners on Friday nights. Church on Sunday mornings, streamed from home because her body had grown more fragile but her faith had not. Daily medication she managed without complaint. A front door camera she probably thought was unnecessary, but her family had installed anyway because they loved her and wanted to know she was safe. She trusted her home, she trusted her neighborhood, she trusted her routine. And on one January night, someone who had studied her from a distance, who had watched her enough to know exactly when she would be alone, exactly which camera to disable first, exactly how to move through her space without leaving a trace, that person decided her trust was a vulnerability they could use. There is something about this case that makes it land differently than others. Maybe it's her age. Maybe it's the specific cruelty of targeting someone whose life is built on predictability and peace. Maybe it's the image of that front door, the last place she was seen, and the quiet that followed. Her family has been living inside that quiet ever since, not just grieving, waiting. And waiting without answers is its own particular kind of suffering, a suspended state where hope and dread exist in the same breath, where every new development is both welcome and terrifying. They deserve to know what happened. Nancy deserves to be found. If you are watching this, I have one final thing to ask of you. Not to subscribe, not to share. Something more important than that. Think. Think about whether you saw anything in the weeks around the 31st of January 2026, in or near Tucson, that felt wrong, but that you explained away. A car you didn't recognize, parked on a quiet street more than once. A person who seemed to be watching without purpose. A conversation that didn't quite fit. Something someone said that you filed away as strange and then forgot. Details like that have solved cases. Not dramatic confrontations, not accidental confessions. A neighbor who noticed a car, a friend who remembered a comment. A stranger who saw something they didn't know mattered. If you know anything, anything here is where you go. FBI tip line 1-800-CALLFBI. Online tips.fbi.gov. Crimestoppers Tucson 520882746. All tips can be submitted anonymously. No name, no identification, just information. And there is more than $1 million in reward money waiting for the information that breaks this case open. The investigation is still moving. The data is still being processed. The circle is still tightening. And somewhere in a cell tower log, in a DNA profile, in a router's access history, in the memory of someone who hasn't yet found the courage to speak the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie is waiting to be found. In 2026, evidence doesn't disappear. It hides in signals, in patterns, in the invisible architecture of a world that is always, quietly, recording. And eventually it surfaces. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for weeks, but she has not been forgotten. Her name will not become a cold case number. Her story will not fade into a file drawer. The people responsible for what happened on the night of January 31st are still out there. But they are not invisible. Not anymore.